For years, when you heard the name Jeffrey Epstein, you probably thought of one thing: scandal. But with the release of millions of documents, a very different and honestly, a much more disturbing story is starting to come into focus. So let's get into it. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to look past the clickbait, beyond the gossip, and really focus on what these files reveal about the hidden structures of influence and protection that are operating at the very highest levels of our society. But to really get to the bottom of this, we have to understand what we're even talking about. What is this evidence? Where did it come from? And crucially, what can it actually tell us and what can't it? Yeah, so how did all of this stuff see the light of day? Well, it wasn't some simple, anonymous leak. Not at all. This was a long, drawn-out, public, and very political fight to get transparency. And this timeline really puts it into perspective, right? We're talking about a path that stretches for decades. It starts way back in 2008 with that, let's say, incredibly controversial plea deal in Florida. Then you jump to 2019, he's indicted on federal charges, and then he dies in jail. But look, it wasn't until 2025, after a literal act of Congress, that we finally started seeing the documents come out.
Right, so when people say the Epstein Files, what does that actually mean? It's super important to get this right. We're not talking about some neat little list of names. This is a mountain of raw data. The Department of Justice itself said there were over 6 million pages that could be relevant from their investigations.
And what's in this mountain of data? Well, pretty much everything you can imagine. We're talking emails, contact books, flight logs from his private jets, even visitor logs from his private island. And get this, over 180,000 images and 2,000 videos. It's a staggering amount of material that paints this incredibly detailed picture of his whole operation. Okay, this is probably the most important point we're going to make. You have to understand what these files do show and what they don't prove. On one hand, yes, they absolutely lay out a massive, sprawling network of connections, social, professional, you name it. But, and this is a big but, just because someone's name is in a file, it does not automatically prove they're guilty of a crime. In fact, a DOJ memo from July 2025 explicitly said they found no credible evidence that Epstein was using blackmail. That distinction between association and proven guilt, that's everything.
So, that brings us to the network itself. We're moving from the what, the evidence, to the who, and maybe more importantly, the how. Because the real bombshell here isn't one single name on a list. It's the pattern. It's the web of connections that stretches across every single sector of the global elite.
And just look at how wide this net was cast. It's not like it was just confined to one area. You've got major players from politics, big names from finance, titans of tech, respected figures from academia and science, and even royalty and media. It's this intersection of all these different worlds of power that's so telling.
You know, this quote really nails it. Maybe the way to think about Epstein isn't that he himself was this incredibly powerful figure. Maybe he was just useful. He was the hub, the central node in the network. The guy who could make an introduction, who could connect these separate, powerful worlds. He was the connector.
So the big question is, how did this go on for so long, right in the open? How did a network like this protect itself? Well, the files don't just show us a network of people. They show us a system of protection. And you can see it happen in clear steps. First, you've got that plea deal back in 2008, an unbelievably lenient deal that let him dodge serious federal charges. And it later came out the prosecutor on that deal had personal meetings with him. Then, step two. Sure, Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted, but for years, hardly any other accomplices or enablers faced charges. And finally, even after a law was passed to force the release of these files, what we got was a slow, heavily blacked out trickle of information. It was so bad it got criticized by pretty much everyone.
Then that's the takeaway, isn't it? The system punished the individuals, Epstein and Maxwell, but it seems like it went out of its way to protect the network. Accountability stopped right there, leaving the whole structure that supported them completely intact.
All right, so here we are. Millions of pages are out there for the world to see. So what now? What's actually changed? And is this story really over? Okay, to understand what happens next, you need to understand two numbers. First, this one, 6 million. That's how many pages the DOJ said were potentially part of the Epstein Files. 6 million. Now look at this number, 3.5 million.
That's how many pages they actually released. That's a huge gap, right? And it's left a lot of people wondering just how committed the DOJ really was to full transparency.
But to be fair, the documents we did get absolutely made waves. There were real-world consequences. We saw high-profile people like Peter Mandelson in the UK and Miroslav Lajchak resign from major positions because of what came out. New investigations were kicked off, so it did have an impact. But with so much still missing, it feels like we're only seeing part of the story. And that really leaves us with the big, lingering question. The files are open, sure, but is the network actually broken? Is transparency by itself enough to dismantle a system of power that has proven time and time again that it knows how to protect itself? What happens when the headlines fade and everyone moves on? That is the real story here, and it's a story that is far from over.